All right, greetings. What's going on, everyone? This is Chris Dixon, and I am back with another video and discussion. Hope y'all are doing good and well today. In this particular video and discussion, I will be going into the practice of necromancy. Pretty much, I just want to give you all some tips and some precautions that you should take into consideration if you're contemplating on practicing necromancy. Necromancy is pretty much communicating and even conjuring up the spirits of the deceased, okay? Whether that be for protection, whether you are seeking, to receive insights, gnosis and wisdom, from the other side, things of that nature. But necromancy is conjuring up and communicating with spirits of the deceased, right? Necromancy is different from what you would call venerating the dead. And of course that pertains to, ancestral work, known as ancestral veneration. Okay, when you're venerating the dead, you're simply paying homage to them and your respects to them. And of course, you are seeking to establish, personal relationships with your ancestral, lineage, and reconnecting yourself back to your bloodline, right? But that's not actual necromancy, okay? Necromancy is actual, sorcery, okay? So it's different. So it's very important that you understand, the difference between actual necromancy as well as venerating the deceased, okay? So some tips, when you are practicing necromancy, it's very important that you work with archetypes that are associated with the death current, okay? And form a personal relationship, with these particular archetypes, whether that be Baron Samni, whether that be Anubis, or even Santa Muerte from Mexico. Santa Muerte is actually the primary archetype that I work with, when I'm doing necromancy and any form of ancestral, work. I work with Santa Muerte. And it's very important that you work with these archetypes because they are the safeguard and the intermediaries between the spirit realm and the physical. So they will work on your behalf to ensure that you have a successful, necromancy, experience, or any other, ancestral work that you're doing, right? Because what they will do is they will protect you and keep away any type of imposter spirit that may try to play the role of a deceased relative that you're trying to make contact with, right? So they will keep those types of spirits away and ensure that the actual spirit of that deceased relative or loved one is conjured up, right? So that's why it's very important to work with archetypes that are connected to the death current, right? The second thing is you need to be very comfortable, with cemeteries, right? If you're not comfortable being in cemeteries, necromancy might not be, the practice for you, right? So it's very important that you get very comfortable, with cemeteries, go to the cemetery, whether it's a random cemetery where you don't know any of the spirits there, like you don't have any loved ones there, or even go to a cemetery where you actually have, loved ones, if that's what makes you more comfortable. But going into a cemetery and just simply walking around, right? Just walk around the cemetery, you know, before you go in. This is what I do. I always tell the spirits of the cemetery that I come in peace and I come with respect, right? And to welcome my presence, right? So I send that, I send my intentions out before I go in, right? And pretty much I just walk around, I don't always do necromancy in the cemetery. You don't have to always go to the cemetery to do this type of work. You can do it, at home, at your ancestral altar, right? But cemeteries, of course, is the common place, where necromancy is practiced, right? So getting comfortable, being in cemeteries, is very important, right? And always, be clear about, what you're doing, right? What your intentions are. Why are you seeking, assistance from, deceased, spirits, right? So never go into it, without any clear intentions, right? And it's very important that you always, when you work with spirits of the deceased, just like working with a deity, right? You always want to give offerings, right? Whether that be tobacco, right? So you can have you a good cigar, right? You can bring with you to the cemetery. Of course, if you don't smoke, you can just simply burn it, that'd be just as good. But if you do smoke, you can take you some puffs, blow it over, the grave, right, of that particular deceased, individual, okay? Cigarettes are good, same thing. Always good to bring some water, spirits, enjoy, water, right? So bringing a bottle of water, pouring it over the graves, that's another good offering. You can, of course, use alcohol, right? But with alcohol, of course, you want to be, careful, with utilizing, alcohol, especially if you, have alcoholism, in your ancestral lineage, right? Because that can actually, give birth to an actual, problem, right? So you don't necessarily have to use alcohol if you don't feel comfortable, right? But if you do, and you feel, confident, in using it, do so, right? And even sometimes, money, is also another good offering. And, even, when you're not just working with spirits of the deceased at the cemetery, even if you take some graveyard dirt, for whatever spiritual workings that you're seeking, graveyard dirt, it's very important that you leave an offering, right? In some cases, some money, right, is what spirits will desire, whether it be $5, what I'm saying, it can be $10, depending on what you're seeking, but just understand that nothing is free, right? The cemetery is not a place where you go into and you just take, graveyard dirt and you just go and seek counsel from spirits of the deceased and you don't have to pay up, right? So you have to pay, something, right? And of course you want to have you a skull, okay? Here's my skull. This one is made out of resin. Okay. So get you a good skull made out of resin, or if you have, the funds, you can even seek to get you a real human skull. But it's going to cost you some money, right? But if you can't afford a real human skull, getting you a skull that's made, from resin, okay? Some people may even use glass skulls, right? I would avoid plastic skulls, directly. So seek to use, skulls that, that's rooted in, the earth element, you know what I'm saying? That's just me. And a lot of, practitioners, of necromancy would say the same thing, right? But the skull, it serves as pretty much a communication device, that, the spirits can communicate with you, via telepathy, right? So they're very useful, tools, right? You can bring them with you to the cemetery. You can hold them next to your ear. You can just simply hold it in your hand. But skulls, are very, powerful tools, used in, necromancy, right? Of course, you want to have your pendulum, right, that you use for divination, right? So you can receive, yes, no, maybe, what I'm saying, answers from the spirits, right? Pendulums are very good for checking, to see if the spirits are even willing to want to work with you, right? So it's very important that you have your pendulum, with you as well. That's pretty much, all I wanted to talk about. I just want to be brief with this particular discussion. So if you're someone who is contemplating on doing necromancy, I hope that this video helped. I hope that I gave you all, some confidence. If you're someone who's been second guessing, themselves on if you want to go into this particular work, right? Because it is, just like any other form of magic, doing necromancy, is a dangerous thing, right? If you're not careful and are not taking the prerequisites and precautions, before you do your work, right? Because it is indeed possible, for spirits of the deceased to possess you. They can haunt you, right? So it's very important that you understand these things. Don't just go into necromancy, trying to conjure up, the spirits of your deceased relatives, or just any spirit in general, right? Without first, taking the proper prerequisites, right, and precautions. And of course, can't stress it enough, work with deities and archetypes that represent, the death current, right? And consort with them first to see if they're willing to help you, themselves. And of course, work with you, with your necromancy, right? So divination is very important, consorting with, actual archetypes or deities, okay, before you begin this particular work, right? And just understand, as long as you go into it with confidence, right, you will have successful, experiences, right? It takes practice, right? becoming successful at necromancy, just like any other form of magic, it's going to take, time, and it's going to take practice and effort, right? But that's pretty much all that I have for this particular discussion. Hope that you all enjoyed it. Found it very informative. All right. Like, subscribe to the channel, right? Continue to listen to the Tunnel Vision podcast on Spotify and other major podcast platforms. If you have any questions, you're interested in any of my services, I do offer different readings, as well as consultations, right? So just hit me up, in my email if you have any questions on that. If you have any questions about, this video, feel free to leave a comment. But that's pretty much all that I have, right? Y'all be safe, enjoy your day, and I will talk to you all on the next discussion. Peace.